My name is Pippa, and before you hear my story, I want you to know I'm not really the vengeful type. I'm a scientist. I believe in data, in observation, in cause and effect, and if you've ever poured your soul into something, only to have it stolen in broad daylight, I need you to listen. Let me know I'm not alone in this, because for a long time, I felt like I was screaming into a vacuum. The kind I used to study. It started, as these things often do, with an email, a simple automated notification from the server that hosts preprint academic papers. A new article had been published. The title was Anomalous Decay Spectra in Pulsar Wind Nebulae, and the author was Dr. Anders Finch. My heart didn't drop, it didn't pound, it just stopped. For a full second, the universe held its breath, and all the air left my tiny grad student office. I clicked the link. The abstract bloomed on my screen, a garden of my own words, my own phrases, my own sentences, all meticulously arranged under his name. Alone. 5 years of my life, distilled into 12 pages of text that claimed I didn't exist. I had poured the coffee, I had run the simulations, babysitting the supercomputer clusters through the dead of night, fueled by stale donuts and the hum of the server fans. I had written the code that sifted through petabytes of raw radio telescope data, the code that found the signal in the first place. A ghost of a signal, a whisper from a dying star that nobody had ever seen before. It was my discovery. My thesis, my future, he had promised me. He'd said it so many times, his voice a warm, reassuring baritone that echoed with the weight of his authority and his long list of accolades. We will publish this together, Pippa. This will make your career. I remember staring at the screen, my finger tracing his name, Dr. Anders Finch. He was a titan in the field of astrophysics, a man whose name opened doors and secured grants. I was Pippa, just Pippa, a grad student, a nobody. I closed the laptop and walked out of my office, leaving the light on. I walked through the quiet, hallowed halls of the physics department, my footsteps making no sound on the worn linoleum. His office door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. I could hear him on the phone, his voice booming with a kind of triumphant cheer I had only ever heard him use with donors or the university dean. Yes, a real breakthrough, years of work, but it finally paid off. I felt a coldness spread through my chest, a glacial freeze that had nothing to do with the building's overzealous air conditioning. I pushed the door open. He looked up, his smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before it was pasted back on. Pippa, he said, just the person. Have you seen the news? He gestured to his monitor, where the same article was displayed like a trophy. I just stood there, in the doorway, unable to form a word. My silence seemed to unnerve him. He ended his call abruptly. What is it? He asked, his tone shifting from celebratory to impatient. I found my voice, but it was thin, a reedy thing I didn't recognize. My name, I said. It's not on the paper. He leaned back in his leather chair, the leather groaning in protest. He steepled his fingers, a gesture I once found thoughtful and professorial, now it looked like a cage. Ah yes, about that, he said, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial hush. The publisher was very insistent. For a paper of this magnitude, they wanted a single authoritative voice, a senior name. It's just cleaner, Pippa. Better for the work, my work. I felt a laugh bubbling up, a hysterical ragged sound. Better for who, Anders? I asked, the name feeling foreign and sharp on my tongue. He had always insisted I call him Dr. Finch. His face hardened. The mask of the charming mentor fell away, and for the first time, I saw the man underneath, The cold, ambitious man who saw me not as a protégé, but as a tool. A very effective, very cheap, very disposable tool. Let's be realistic, Pippa, he said, his voice flat and dismissive. This is a competitive field, it's my lab. My grant money. My reputation. You're a graduate student, what are you going to do? Run to the dean, it's your word against mine. Whose do you think they'll believe? He stood up then, a looming figure of tweed and casual arrogance. Don't be naive. This is how the world works. You've done some good work here. You'll get your doctorate, you'll get a nice letter of recommendation. Be grateful and move on. He turned his back to me then, a clear dismissal, and started typing on his keyboard. The meeting was over, my 5 years of devotion, my groundbreaking discovery, my future, all of it had just been erased in a 10-second conversation. And he was right. I was a nobody. My word meant nothing against the celebrated Dr. Anders Finch. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that I had signed my work, not with a name, but with a ghost in his machine, a ghost that was about to follow him onto the biggest stage in our world. The walk back to my apartment was a blur. I don't remember the streets I crossed, or the cars that passed. I remember the feeling of the key in my hand, fumbling with the lock. The click of the door shutting behind me was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of a coffin lid closing. For a long time, I just stood there in the dark, my backpack still slung over one shoulder, the weight of it pressing me into the floor. Then I let it slide off. It hit the ground with a dull thud, the sound of 5 years of notebooks, printouts, and dreams hitting rock bottom. And then I broke. It wasn't a loud, screaming breakdown, it was a silent one. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the cold, dusty floor, and I just came apart. The tears weren't hot, they were ice cold, like the feeling that had taken root in my chest in his office. They traced paths down my face. But I didn't make a sound. It was the kind of soul-deep weeping that is completely silent. A complete collapse of the self when you realize the foundation you've built your entire life on was a lie. Every late night, every sacrificed weekend, every strained conversation with my family who wondered when I'd ever be finished with school, it all played back in my mind, not as a montage of hard work, but as a highlight reel of my own stupidity. He had been so convincing. That was the truly cruel part. Anders Finch hadn't been a monster from day one. He had been a savior. I got into the astrophysics program by the skin of my teeth. My grades were good, but my background wasn't from a prestigious university. I was state school, through and through. On the first day of orientation, he sought me out. He said he'd read my entrance essay, the one about wanting to listen to the old songs of the universe. He said he saw a spark in me. He called it intuition, a feel for the data that couldn't be taught. He brought me into his research group, the most sought-after position in the department. It felt like being chosen by a king. I remember the first year. I was starstruck. I was running errands, formatting his citations, double-checking data from other people's projects, the grunt work, but I didn't care. I was in the room. I was learning. I was breathing the same air as the great Anders Finch. He would sit with me, sometimes in the observation room, the soft red light making us both look like phantoms. He'd talk about the beauty of it all, the cosmic ballet. He made me feel like I was part of something grand and important. He made me feel seen. The second and third years were a blur of work. That's when we started the Pulsar project. It was his idea, but it was my hands on the keyboard. He would sketch out grand theories on his whiteboard, sweeping gestures and elegant equations, and then he would leave. Go on, Pippa. He'd say with a paternal smile, "See if the data agrees with my little daydream." And I would. I'd spend weeks, months, wrestling with the code, cleaning the noisy data from the Arecibo telescope, trying to find the whisper of a pattern he'd imagined. More often than not, his daydreams were just that. But I never saw it as a failure. I just saw it as part of the process. The day I found it, I almost missed it. It was 3 in the morning. My eyes were burning. My desk was littered with empty coffee cups. I was running a new filtering algorithm. I'd written myself, something more sensitive than the standard models. And then there it was. A blip, a tiny rhythmic anomaly in the decay spectrum of a magnetar we'd been watching for months. It was something that shouldn't have been there. It was beautiful. It was impossible. I didn't even think. I called him. At 3 in the morning, he picked up on the second ring, his voice thick with sleep, and I, babbling with excitement, told him what I'd found. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he said 2 words that I would cling to for the next 2 years. He said, "You did it," not "we did it." He said, "You did it." The next 2 years were a frantic, exhilarating race. We had to confirm it, replicate it, understand it. It was my life. I dropped every other class, every other project. I lived in that lab. Anders was different. He was energized, but also more distant. He started referring to it as my pulsar in meetings. When I gently corrected him once, in private, saying it was our project, he laughed it off. "Don't be so territorial, Pippa. We're a team." But it felt less and less like a team, and more like I was a technician in his factory. He was the visionary, and I was the hands. He would fly to conferences in Geneva and Kyoto, presenting our preliminary findings, always with his name first, my name a small footnote on the final slide, while I stayed behind, running the follow-up observations. He said it was more efficient this way. He said my time was too valuable to be wasted on planes. I needed to be with the data, and like an idiot, I believed him. I told myself it was for the good of the work. My friend Kenji saw it. He was another grad student in the department, a quiet, brilliant guy working on gravitational lensing. His advisor was a notoriously difficult woman who barely acknowledged his existence. We were comrades in the trenches. He'd bring me coffee on my late nights. We'd complain about our advisors in hushed tones in the library stacks. He'd look at the dark circles under my eyes and say, "Pippa, he's running you into the ground." I'd always defend Anders. "He's a genius, Kenji. This is what it takes." Kenji would just shake his head. "A genius shouldn't need to steal someone else's light to shine," he'd say. I thought he was being cynical. It turns out he was just being observant. Sitting there on my apartment floor, the cold seeping into my bones, all these memories came flooding back, each one a small cut, a tiny betrayal I had ignored. The sum of them was this hollow, empty feeling, this profound and utter foolishness. The man I had idolized had systematically erased me from my own life's work. And in that cold, dark moment, something else surfaced, had a different memory. Not from the lab, but from my childhood. It was my grandfather. He was a watchmaker, a quiet man who smelled of metal and oil and old wood. He would sit at his workbench for hours, tiny gears and springs spread out on a black velvet cloth, his face a mask of concentration under his magnifying visor. When he finished a particularly complex repair or built a custom piece, he would do something I found fascinating. He would take a tiny, sharp tool, and, on the inside of the watch case, in a place no one but another watchmaker would ever see. He would scratch a tiny, stylized bird. It was his signature, his mark. I asked him why he did it. He looked at me over the top of his glasses and said, "A craftsman has to sign his work, Pippa. Not for the customer, for himself. So he knows a piece of him is in there. So he knows it's true," and that was it. That was the catalyst. The ice in my veins didn't melt. It hardened. It turned from the ice of grief into the ice of resolve. My grandfather, the watchmaker, me, the datasmith. He was right. A craftsman signs their work. And the tears stopped. I stood up, my knees cracking in the silence. I walked over to my desk, powered on my personal laptop, not the university one, and opened a file. It was a piece of code I had written a year ago, on a night when Anders had been particularly dismissive, when he had presented my initial findings at a conference as his own for the first time. I had felt a flicker of unease then, a premonition. I had told myself I was being paranoid, but the unease had been strong enough to make me act. It wasn't about revenge. I have to be clear about that. At the time, it wasn't a trap. It was a signature. An act of quiet defiance. It was for me, just like my grandfather's bird. It was my way of carving my initials into the foundation of the discovery. A piece of myself hidden where no one would ever look. I had created a unique data anomaly, a digital watermark. It was a sequence of micro-variations, embedded deep within the raw telemetry of the pulsar's signal. It wasn't random noise. It was a complex, non-repeating pattern, based on a sequence of prime numbers only I knew. When processed through a specific visualization algorithm I had written, the pattern didn't look like a word or a symbol. That would be too obvious, too crude. Instead, it resolved into a perfect, ghostly image of the constellation Lyra, my favorite constellation, the one that had first made me fall in love with the night sky. It was elegant. It was undetectable. It was my bird, hidden inside the watch case. It was a digital ghost, haunting the data, and Anders Finch had just published it under his own name. He had no idea that my signature was woven into the very fabric of his stolen masterpiece. My resolve was a cold, hard thing now. It wasn't about shouting or crying or running to the dean. He was right about that. My word meant nothing. But data was everything. Data was truth. I wasn't going to fight him with words. I was going to let his own prize-winning data tear him apart in front of the entire world. The first thing I did was call Kenji. It was past midnight, but he picked up immediately. I heard the familiar clatter of a keyboard in the background. "Pippa, are you okay?" I saw the paper. He didn't say he was sorry. He didn't offer platitudes. He just knew. That's why he was my friend. "I'm fine, Kenji," I said. And my voice was so steady it surprised even me. "I need your help." I went over to his cramped apartment, a place that smelled of instant noodles and soldering flux. He was sitting in front of a bank of monitors, his own research on gravitational lensing painting, psychedelic patterns across the screens. He listened patiently as I laid out the whole story, from the promise of co-authorship to the final brutal dismissal. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he just nodded slowly. "I knew it," he said softly. "I knew he was a parasite. What do you need?" I explained the watermark. I called it the Lyra anomaly. His eyes, normally half-lidded with exhaustion, widened. "You embedded a signature in the raw telemetry. Pippa, he trailed off, looking for the right word. Insane, I offered. He shook his head. Brilliant. It's brilliant. But how do you get him to show the raw data? He'll have his own pre-packaged slides. He'll never go off script. That's the problem we need to solve, I said. And we did. For the next 3 weeks, my apartment and his became a war room. We drank terrible coffee and lived on pizza. It wasn't about revenge, I kept telling myself. I even said it out loud to Kenji once. He just gave me a look. Call it what you want, Pippa, he said. Call it a peer review. A very, very public peer review. The plan had 3 parts. First, the bait. Second, the stage. Third, the trigger. The stage was the easiest part to identify. In 2 months, the International Astrophysics Symposium was being held in Stockholm. It was the biggest conference of the year. Anders was scheduled to be the keynote speaker. The title of his address was already on the conference website. A New Light, Anomalous Decay Spectra, and the Future of Particle Physics. It was the perfect stage. He would be at the peak of his triumph, accepting the adulation of our entire community. The fall would be so much harder from that height. The bait was more complex. I couldn't just accuse him, I needed to force his hand. We spent days brainstorming. We role-played, Kenji played Anders, adopting his smug, condescending tone with terrifying accuracy. I played myself, the humble grad student. We realized the key was to frame the question, not as an accusation, but as an exciting, new scientific possibility. Something that would flatter his ego. Something that would make him want to engage, to show off his mastery of the data. We settled on the perfect question. It had to be technical enough to sound credible, and specific enough to require him to drill down into the raw telemetry, past his canned PowerPoint slides. We focused on a specific energy range in the signal, a place where my Lyra anomaly resided. My question would suggest a potential discovery even more profound than the one he was presenting. I would be offering him a bigger prize, a brighter spotlight. His ego, we gambled, would be unable to resist. He would want to prove me wrong, or even more deliciously, prove me right and claim this new discovery as his own live on stage. It was a trap built from his own arrogance. The trigger was the visualization algorithm. The raw data itself, displayed as numbers, wouldn't show anything obvious. The anomaly was a pattern, not a single data point. It needed a key to unlock it. The standard visualization software, used by the university, wouldn't work. But I had my own. I had built it myself. And this was the trickiest part of the plan. How could I get him to use my algorithm? Kenji had the answer. He pointed out that about 6 months ago, Anders had complained about the standard software being clunky. He had asked me to find something better, more intuitive, with more powerful rendering for live presentations. So I had found something. I had presented my own custom-built algorithm to him, under the guise of it being a new open-source tool from a small German tech firm. I had even built a fake website for it. I called it Stellargraph. Anders, who couldn't be bothered with technical details, loved it. It was sleek, it was fast, and it made his data look beautiful. He had been using it for all his presentations ever since. He had no idea he was using the very key that would unlock his own downfall. The Lyra anomaly was invisible to every other program, but in Stellargraph, all you had to do was apply a specific filter. A filter I had labeled noise reduction subharmonics, and the pattern would emerge. The final piece was logistics. I was a broke grad student. A flight to Stockholm and a ticket to the symposium were thousands of dollars. Anders had made sure I was taken off the university's travel grant list. It was a final, petty twist of the knife. I sold my car, an old beat-up sedan that had gotten me through college. It was just enough. Kenji helped me book the flight and the cheapest hotel we could find, a tiny room an hour away from the conference center. The day I flew out, I packed a single bag, a suit I'd bought at a thrift store, my laptop, and a small framed photo of my grandfather at his workbench. As I sat on the plane, high above the clouds, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger and the grief had burned away, leaving behind a core of cold, clear purpose. I thought about the irony of it all. Anders thought he was flying to Stockholm to accept an award for discovering a new star. He had no idea he was really flying into a black hole of his own making, and that I, his forgotten student, was the event horizon. It wasn't about revenge. It was about correcting the record. It was about truth. It was about signing my name. The conference hall in Stockholm was immense, a cavern of glass and steel. It was filled with the low hum of 1,000 conversations in a dozen languages, the collective murmur of the brightest minds in astrophysics. I felt incredibly small, a tiny anonymous particle in a giant accelerator. I saw faces I recognized from textbooks, legends of the field, all of them milling around, drinking coffee, looking at posters, and in the center of it all, holding court, was Anders. He was laughing, his arm draped over the shoulder of a Nobel laureate. He looked radiant, utterly at home in the spotlight. He was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. A small crowd of admirers hung on his every word. I watched him from a distance, my heart a cold, steady drum in my chest. He didn't see me. To him I was a ghost, a piece of old news, a problem that had been solved. That was my advantage. No one ever suspects the ghost. Kenji had done his part perfectly. He had registered me for the conference using a grant from a different department, burying my name in a list of attendees he knew Anders would never bother to read. He had also, through a friend who worked for the conference organizers, managed to get me pre-approved for the Q&A session after the keynote. My name was on the list. All I had to do was stand up. I spent the first 2 days of the conference in a haze. I went to sessions, I took notes, I tried to focus, but it was all just noise. My entire being was focused on one single moment, the keynote address on the final day. I rehearsed the question in my mind, over and over, until the words lost all meaning. I visualized the sequence of events, him on stage, the big screen, the data, the reveal. I ran the simulation in my head 1,000 times. On the morning of the keynote, I put on my thrift store suit. It didn't fit quite right, but it made me feel like I was wearing armor. I took the train to the conference center, my laptop bag a heavy weight on my shoulder. The main auditorium was packed. There wasn't an empty seat. I found a spot in the back, off to the side, an optimal position to see both the stage and the reaction of the crowd. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the auditorium. The head of the symposium walked on stage and began the introduction. He spoke of Anders in glowing terms, a visionary, a pioneer, a man who had fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe. I felt a wave of nausea. This whole world, this entire institution, was built on men like him, men who stood on the shoulders of people they had crushed. Then Anders walked out onto the stage to thunderous applause. He beamed, soaking it in. He stepped up to the podium, arranged his notes, and began to speak. And he was brilliant. I had to give him that. He was a gifted storyteller, weaving a narrative of cosmic discovery that held the entire room spellbound. He spoke of the lonely pulsar, the faint signal, the years of painstaking work. He used the word I a lot. I discovered, I realized, I pursued, my work, my discovery with every I. The coldness in my chest grew. He came to the crescendo of his speech, displaying the final beautiful graphs of the decay spectrum. The data was undeniable. It was a monumental discovery. My discovery. The applause when he finished was deafening. He stood there, basking in it, a king on his throne. The moderator stepped forward. "We have time for a few questions," she announced. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. This was it. The moment of truth. My hand felt slick with sweat. I saw the moderator scan the room, her eyes looking for the first questioner. I felt a surge of panic. What if she didn't call on me? What if my nerve failed? Then I thought of my grandfather, scratching his little bird into the back of a watch. I thought of 5 years of my life. Erased, the panic subsided, replaced by that familiar cold resolve. The moderator's eyes landed on my section. "A young woman in the back," she said, gesturing towards me. "Go ahead." I stood up, the single spotlight found me. And for a second I was blinded. 1,000 faces turned to look at me. I could feel Anders' gaze from the stage. I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Then annoyance. He thought I was here to make a scene. To embarrass him. That was perfect. It meant he was underestimating me. Again, I walked to the microphone in the aisle. My footsteps echoed in the silent hall. I took a deep breath. "Dr. Finch." I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified by the hall's sound system. It was an absolutely stunning presentation. The work is revolutionary. I had to start with praise. That was part of the plan. Flatter the ego. He gave a small magnanimous nod. A king accepting tribute from a peasant. "Thank you," he said. I continued, delivering the lines Kenji and I had rehearsed into the ground. I was particularly fascinated by the consistency of the decay curve. But in looking at the preliminary datasets you released online, I noticed something, a faint, tertiary oscillation pattern in the raw telemetry. It's most prominent around the 1.6 giga-electron-volt range, and it seems to defy conventional models of quark-gluon plasma decay. I was wondering if you could isolate that specific signal for us, because if it's not an instrument artifact, it could imply an entirely new particle interaction, something even more significant than the primary discovery. A murmur went through the crowd. I had just dangled a new universe in front of them. Anders was silent for a moment. I could see the gears turning in his head. He was caught. If he dismissed me, he would look like he was afraid of the question, afraid of his own data. If he engaged, he would be walking directly into my trap. His ego made the choice for him. "That's a very specific question," he said, a hint of condescension in his voice. He was trying to frame me as an obsessive crank, a data dredger seeing patterns in the noise. Most of those minor oscillations are just instrument noise, systemic interference. They get filtered out during processing for a reason. "Of course," I replied, my voice still perfectly calm, perfectly respectful, but this one didn't look like standard interference. It had a unique, almost structured signature. Perhaps you could just pull up the raw telemetry from that data block. "You're using the stellar graph visualizer, aren't you? It's excellent for isolating subharmonics." He was trapped. The entire room was leaning forward, intrigued. A new particle interaction. Live on stage? This was better than the keynote. He forced a smile. "All right," he said, his voice tight. "Let's take a look. But I assure you, it's nothing." He turned to his laptop on the podium. The huge screen behind him, which had been showing his final slide, now mirrored his desktop. The crowd watched as he navigated through folders, his movements a little too quick, a little too jerky. He found the data file. He opened it in Stellargraph. A chaotic storm of data points filled the screen. Now, he said, gesturing to the screen with a flourish. As you can see, it's a mess. Raw telemetry always is. Where exactly did you say this anomaly was? The 1.6 GeV range, Doctor, I said. If you just apply the subharmonic noise reduction filter, it should clean it right up. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. I could see the internal conflict. He didn't want to follow the instructions of a grad student, but the entire world was watching. He let out a sigh. A theatrical display of a great man indulging a fool. Fine. He moved his cursor to the filter menu. He clicked it. He scrolled down the list of options. I saw his cursor hover over the words, Noise Reduction Subharmonics. My heart stopped. He clicked it. For a moment, nothing happened. The program was processing petabytes of data. The screen held the chaotic swirl of points. And then, it resolved. The noise fell away. The random points vanished. And what was left behind, shimmering in the center of the screen in glowing electric blue, was a perfect, unmistakable celestial map, a constellation. My constellation, Lyra. A gasp went through the auditorium. It was a collective, audible shock. It was a signal that was not natural. It was too perfect, too structured, too deliberate. It was art. It was a signature. Anders stared at the screen, his mouth slightly open. He looked from the screen to his laptop, then back to the screen. His face, which had been flushed with triumph, was now a ghastly pale white. He looked like he had seen a ghost, and in a way he had. The moderator, confused, spoke into her microphone. Dr. Finch, what is that? It was a question the entire room was asking. Anders didn't answer. He couldn't. He just stood there, frozen, his entire world collapsing in silent, spectacular fashion on a 50-foot screen. The silence in the hall stretched for an eternity. It was a thick, heavy silence, broken only by the quiet hum of the projector. Then I lifted the microphone back to my lips. My voice, when it came out, was not triumphant. It was quiet, factual, and it carried to every corner of the room. That, I said, is the Lyra anomaly. It's a digital watermark. My watermark. I embedded it in the raw data a year ago to sign my work. A roar went through the crowd. A tidal wave of whispers, shouts, and the frantic clicking of 100 cameras. People were standing up, turning to their neighbors, pointing at the screen, then at Anders, then at me. It was chaos. The moderator was trying to restore order, but it was impossible. The story was too incredible, too scandalous. On stage, Anders finally moved. He stumbled back from the podium as if it were white hot. He looked out at the sea of faces, his eyes wide with panic and disbelief. He looked at the screen, at the glowing constellation that was his indictment, and then his eyes found mine. In them, I saw it all: the rage, the humiliation, the dawning, sickening horror of total ruin. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a man who had been shot and was only now realizing he was bleeding out. Members of the conference committee were rushing onto the stage. One of them, a stern-faced German woman, whose work I had admired for years, took the microphone. "This session is over," she announced, her voice cutting through the din. "The awards ceremony, scheduled for this evening, has been postponed pending an immediate investigation." 2 security guards were flanking Anders now, not touching him, but creating a clear perimeter. They escorted him off the stage, not through the wings where he had entered in triumph, but out the back, like a disgraced employee, being led out of the building. The crowd began to surge towards me. I was surrounded by a swarm of people, journalists shouting questions, professors I had only read in textbooks trying to shake my hand, other grad students looking at me with a mixture of awe and terror. It was overwhelming. I felt a hand on my arm, and I flinched, but it was Kenji. He had a fierce, protective look on his face. "Let's go," he said, and he began to carve a path for me through the mob. We escaped out a side door and into the cold Stockholm air. The city felt different now. The sky seemed brighter. I was gulping in air, my lungs burning, my adrenaline was crashing, and I started to shake. Kenji put his arm around me. "You did it, Pippa," he said, his voice full of disbelief and pride. "You actually did it." My phone started buzzing in my pocket. It didn't stop. Emails, texts, alerts. News travels fast in the digital age, faster than light, almost. An article from a major science journal was already online, with the headline, "Scandal at Stockholm. Finch keynote ends in allegations of plagiarism, stunning on-stage reveal." They had a photo of the Lyra constellation on the big screen. The power shift was immediate and brutal. Academia, for all its pretense of civility, can be a vicious ecosystem. Anders Finch had been at the top of the food chain, but a predator who is exposed as a fraud becomes prey in an instant. The client exodus began that afternoon. His co-investigators from the Max Planck Institute and CERN, who were listed on his wider project grants, issued a joint statement. They were deeply concerned by the allegations and were suspending all collaboration with Anders' lab pending the outcome of the university's investigation. It was academic speak for "we're cutting him loose before he sinks us too." His desperate countermove came that evening. I was in my hotel room with Kenji, watching the news reports flicker across the television screen, when an email from him landed in my inbox. The subject line was just my name. The email was a torrent of rage, threats, and bizarre pleading. He called me a sociopath, a fame-hungry little schemer. He accused me of sabotaging his life's work. He threatened to sue me for defamation, for hacking, for everything he could think of. Then, in the same email, the tone shifted. He offered to reissue the paper with my name as lead author. He offered me a full professorship at the university. He offered me anything. "Just name your price," he wrote. "Just make this go away." It was the desperate thrashing of a drowning man. I didn't reply. I just forwarded the email to the university's new ethics investigation committee. It was more data for their collection. The next day, the university officially announced his suspension. His lab was sealed. His grants were frozen. The world he had built, the empire of prestige and influence, had evaporated in less than 24 hours. It turned out that a grad student's word, when backed by irrefutable, publicly demonstrated data, meant everything. I stayed in Stockholm for 2 more days, mostly hiding in my hotel room. The offers started pouring in. Emails from the heads of department at Cambridge, Caltech, MIT. They didn't just want my thesis. They wanted me. They wanted the mind that had not only made the discovery, but had also possessed the foresight and the courage to sign it in such an audacious way. It was intoxicating and terrifying. For 5 years, I had been fighting for a single footnote on a single paper. Now I was being offered the world. The final confrontation happened at the airport. Kenji and I were waiting at our gate, drinking overpriced coffee, when I saw him. Anders, he looked like a different person. His expensive suit was rumpled. He hadn't shaved. The confident, booming titan was gone, replaced by a gray, stooped man who looked 10 years older. He saw me and walked over, his movements slow, defeated. Kenji stood up, ready to intervene. But I put a hand on his arm. "It's okay," I said. Anders stopped a few feet away from our table. He didn't look at Kenji, he only looked at me. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Why?" he asked, his voice a hoarse whisper. That was the only word. "Why? I gave you everything. A place in my lab, a chance to work on the biggest project in the field. I was going to make your career." I stood up to face him. I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt a kind of profound, weary pity. "No, Anders," I said, my voice quiet but clear over the airport announcements. "You didn't give me a chance, you gave me a job. You didn't see me as a protege, you saw me as an instrument, a very useful one, I'll grant you, but an instrument nonetheless." He shook his head, a flicker of his old arrogance returning. "You were a student, I was the professor. That's how it has always worked." "Maybe," I said, "but you said something to me in your office that day. You said my word meant nothing against your reputation. I just wanted to prove you wrong. I wanted to show you that data is the only reputation that matters, the only truth. You built your career on the truth of the universe. It's ironic that you thought you could build it on a lie." He had no answer for that. He just stared at me, the last of the fight going out of him. He looked utterly broken, a man erased by his own hubris. I turned away, picked up my bag, and walked towards the boarding gate with Kenji. I didn't look back. The flight home felt different. It wasn't a return, it was a departure. I was no longer Pippa, the grad student. I was Dr. Pippa Rossi, the discoverer of the Lyra anomaly. The university fast-tracked my dissertation defense. It was a formality. They awarded me my doctorate with distinction. The paper was officially retracted, and a new one was published in its place, in the most prestigious journal in the world, this time, with a single author, me. A few weeks later, I heard the news through the academic grapevine. Anders Finch had been fired. The ethics committee found a pattern of misconduct stretching back years. Other students he had marginalized, other work he had claimed as his own. My case was just the one that had brought the whole rotten structure down. He disappeared from the field. I heard he took a consulting job in the private sector, far from the world of pure research he claimed to love. He was a ghost now too. I ended up accepting an offer from a rival university, one that was famous for its collaborative and supportive environment. They didn't just give me a position. They gave me my own lab. They funded my research, no questions asked. They gave me the freedom to build something new, on my own terms. The first person I hired was Kenji. He's now the lead astrophysicist on my team, and we're mapping the entire sector of the sky, where the Lyra anomaly was found. We think it's just the beginning. Sometimes, late at night in my new lab, surrounded by the quiet hum of my own equipment, I think about him. I think about that choice I made, the cold resolve that settled in my heart, and I find myself saying it again, a quiet mantra to myself. It wasn't about revenge. It was never about destroying him. It was about refusing to be erased. It was about building myself. It was about the simple, profound act of signing my own work. My grandfather, the watchmaker, would have understood. The truth, like a finely crafted timepiece, has a way of ticking on, long after the noise has faded, and my name, like his little bird, is now etched into a piece of the cosmos, right where it belongs. So that's my story, and I'm telling you this not for applause, and not for sympathy. I'm telling you this because I know I'm not the only one. Maybe you haven't been cheated out of a discovery in astrophysics, but I bet you've been in a meeting where your idea was stolen. I bet you've worked late on a project, only to see someone else get the credit. I bet you've been overlooked, underestimated, or told that your word means nothing against someone else's reputation. Your story deserves to be heard. Your work deserves to be signed. Don't let anyone erase you. Don't let them tell you that this is just how the world works. You have the power to correct the record. Sometimes it's a quiet conversation, sometimes it's a new job, and sometimes you have to embed your signature in the very fabric of the work itself and wait for the perfect moment to bring it into the light. Thank you for listening. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt that sting of injustice, leave a comment below and let me know. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember to subscribe for more stories about reclaiming what's yours. It helps to know we're not alone.